They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I served mine at exactly 62 degrees Fahrenheit in a boardroom overlooking the San Francisco Bay, watching the people who once called me an outsider pack their belongings into cardboard boxes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 5 years ago, I was nobody. Just Ava Reyes, the adopted daughter of Richard and Martha Davenport, working as a low-level project manager at Davenport Manufacturing, a company that had been family-owned for 50 years. I say family-owned because apparently, being raised by the family for 23 years doesn't make you family when it comes to business. The turning point came during the company's 50th anniversary celebration at the Ritz-Carlton in Half Moon Bay. The entire Bay Area elite was there, along with all our employees and business partners. I had just saved a major logistics crisis that could have cost us a $2 million contract with Tesla. I'd worked 70-hour weeks for 3 months straight, coordinating between our suppliers in Mexico and the production timeline. But when the speeches began, it was my adopted brother Leo who took credit for his innovative supply chain solutions. I stood in the back of the ballroom, watching him bask in applause that should have been mine. When Aunt Carol Davenport stepped up to the microphone for the keynote address. Carol was the family matriarch, Richard's older sister, and the majority shareholder. Her words that night would change everything. Davenport Manufacturing was built on the blood, sweat, and sacrifice of the Davenport family, she declared, her voice carrying across the silent room. Her eyes found mine across the crowd. This legacy will only be passed down to those who carry true Davenport blood in their veins. We will never allow our life's work to fall into the hands of outsiders. The silence that followed was deafening. Every head in the room turned toward me, the only outsider in the family. My adopted sister Tiffany smirked from her table near the front. Leo raised his champagne flute in a mock toast. Even my adoptive parents, Richard and Martha, simply looked down at their plates, too cowardly to defend the daughter they'd raised. I didn't cry. I didn't run. Instead, I smiled mysteriously and raised my water glass in return, letting them think they'd won. Because what they didn't know was that I already owned them. After the party, I drove back to my modest apartment in Oakland, my mind racing, not with hurt, but with anticipation. 5 years earlier, when I was 23, my grandmother Eleanor Vance had passed away. Eleanor was my biological mother's mother, the only family member who had ever seen my potential. She was a steel magnolia from old Texas money who had built her own investment empire and had never been impressed by the Davenport's small-time manufacturing operation. In her will, Eleanor left me her entire $80 million fortune with a simple note. Don't use this money to buy happiness, darling. Use it to build an empire that small-minded people could never touch. Show them that true worth isn't in bloodlines, but in backbone. The timing had been perfect. Right after Eleanor's death, I learned through my finance degree and some careful research that Davenport Manufacturing was hemorrhaging money. Their outdated equipment, poor management decisions, and Richard's gambling addiction had pushed the company to the brink of bankruptcy. Using a trusted financial advisor named Ben Carter, whom Eleanor had recommended, I created a series of shell companies and trusts based in Delaware and Switzerland. I invested $75 million anonymously, purchasing 51% of the company's shares and essentially saving it from collapse. For 5 years, I had been the secret majority owner of the company that treated me like hired help. I took the low-level job, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to be inside, observing every weakness, every mistake, every moment of incompetence from the family that had raised me but never accepted me. I was waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. That moment came sooner than expected. 3 weeks after the anniversary humiliation, Davenport Manufacturing had the opportunity to secure an exclusive contract with the Department of Defense worth $50 million over 5 years. It was the kind of deal that could set the company up for decades. But Leo, in his infinite wisdom, had made a crucial error during negotiations. He'd revealed our production capacity limitations to the competing bidder, Apex Innovations from Denver, essentially handing them the advantage on a silver platter. The Davenport family was in full panic mode. Carol called emergency meetings. Richard started drinking more heavily. They desperately needed additional capital to make a more attractive offer and outbid Apex. They tried repeatedly to contact their mysterious Swiss investor for additional funding, but of course, received no response. That's when Tiffany made her fatal mistake. desperate to find a scapegoat for Leo's incompetence. She accused me of leaking company information to Apex Innovations. She fabricated evidence using edited email screenshots and demanded that Richard fire me immediately. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday morning in Richard's corner office. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was being accused of corporate espionage in the building I secretly owned. I sat calmly across from Richard's desk, listening to his stammering accusations, watching him sweat as he struggled to fire the daughter he'd raised. I presented my alibis methodically. I showed him my security badge logs, proving I hadn't accessed the sensitive files Tiffany claimed I'd stolen. I pulled up my email records demonstrating that I'd had no contact with anyone at Apex. Most importantly, I pointed out the technical inconsistencies in Tiffany's evidence that any competent IT professional would catch. Richard looked confused, caught between his wife's pressure and the obvious holes in the story. But he still chose the cowardly path. "Ava, I think it's best if you take a temporary leave of absence while we sort this out," he said, unable to meet my eyes. I nodded calmly and gathered my things, knowing this was exactly the opening I needed. That evening, Leo intercepted me in the parking garage. He was drunk and angry, his face flushed with rage and embarrassment over his failed negotiations. "You think you're so smart," he snarled, grabbing my arm and pushing me against my car. "You're just an orphan we took in out of pity. Don't think you have any right to interfere with real Davenport business." I'd been preparing for this moment for years. The self-defense classes, the martial arts training, the mental preparation. When Leo grabbed me, I didn't hesitate. I used his momentum against him, stepping aside and letting him crash into the concrete pillar behind me. As he groaned on the ground, I looked down at him with the same calm expression I'd worn during Carol's speech. "Don't ever touch me again," I said quietly, and walked away. 3 days later, Carol and Richard called an emergency board meeting to discuss selling additional shares to a new investor. They were so desperate to save the defense contract that they were willing to dilute their ownership even further. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning in the conference room on the 20th floor. I arrived 30 minutes after the meeting began, accompanied by Ben Carter and carrying a leather briefcase full of documents. The conference room fell silent as I walked in, wearing a sharp navy Armani suit that cost more than most of the employees made in a month. Carol stood up immediately. "What are you doing here? This is a private board meeting, not for low-level employees." Ben Carter set his briefcase on the polished conference table and opened it slowly. "Mrs. Davenport." "Miss?" "Reyes is here as the authorized representative of Vance Holdings, the majority shareholder of this company." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard's face went white. Leo, who had been released on bail the day before, after his arrest for the break-in attempt at my apartment, looked like he was going to be sick. I smiled and took my seat at the head of the table. More specifically, Vance Holdings is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Reyes Family Trust. I am the sole beneficiary and manager of that trust. In other words, for the past 5 years, I have been keeping this company alive. I own 51% of Davenport Manufacturing. I activated the conference room's smart screen and displayed a comprehensive ownership chart showing the complex but completely legal structure of shell companies, trusts, and holdings that led back to me. Every document was authentic. Every transaction legitimate. Every legal detail bulletproof. Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "That's impossible," she whispered. "It's quite possible," I replied, advancing to the next slide showing financial records. "And quite profitable. This company was 3 months away from bankruptcy when I invested. I saved your jobs, your legacy, and your reputation. But apparently, bloodline matters more than competence in this family." Richard found his voice first. "Ava, sweetheart, we can work this out. We're family." I laughed, and the sound echoed in the silent room. Family? Was I family when Carol announced that outsiders would never control this company? Was I family when Tiffany tried to frame me for corporate espionage? Was I family when Leo assaulted me in the parking garage? The room erupted in denials and explanations, but I held up my hand for silence. "I'm not withdrawing my investment," I continued, and I saw relief flood their faces. "I'm doing something much better. As the majority shareholder, I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove the current board of directors and install new leadership. Specifically, I'm removing Carol Davenport as chairman, Richard Davenport as CEO, and Leo Davenport as vice president of operations. The battle that followed was swift but vicious. Carol used her media connections to paint me as an ungrateful opportunist, trying to steal the company from the family that had raised me. The local business press picked up the story. But I was ready for that too. I released financial documents showing the company's near bankruptcy before my investment, along with detailed records of Leo's incompetence and the lost defense contract. More importantly, I met privately with every other shareholder, every board member, every major investor. I didn't just present evidence of the Davenports' mismanagement. I showed them a comprehensive business plan for the future. My vision included modernizing our equipment, expanding into renewable energy manufacturing, and leveraging artificial intelligence for supply chain optimization. The numbers were compelling. The strategy was sound, and the potential returns were enormous. One by one, they switched sides. Even some of the longtime family friends couldn't ignore the financial reality. The Davenports had been coasting on reputation and nostalgia for years, while the industry evolved around them. The final vote took place on a Monday morning in October. By a margin of 7-2, the board voted to remove the Davenport family from leadership positions. I watched them pack their personal items while a crowd of reporters waited outside, documenting the end of a 50-year dynasty. 6 months later, I stood in my new office on the top floor of what was now called Vance Innovations. The company had not only recovered the defense contract, but had signed 3 additional major deals, including a partnership with SpaceX for spacecraft component manufacturing. I'd instituted profit sharing for all employees, created a merit-based promotion system, and established a culture built on competence rather than connections. The view from my office looked out over the San Francisco Bay, where container ships carried goods around the world. On my desk sat a framed photo of my grandmother Eleanor, the woman who had given me both the means and the wisdom to build something lasting. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tiffany. Mom's having a breakdown. Dad's drinking himself to death. Please. We're still family. I read it once, deleted it without responding, and turned back to the business plans spread across my desk. The Davenport family had lost everything: their mansion in Palo Alto, their vacation home in Tahoe, their social standing, their company, and their sense of identity. They were living in a rented 2-bedroom apartment in Fremont, watching news reports about Vance Innovations' continued success while struggling to pay their basic bills. It was the most satisfying kind of revenge, not violent or illegal, but absolutely complete. They had to watch the person they'd dismissed as an outsider build something greater than they'd ever imagined, using the ruins of what they'd destroyed through their own incompetence and arrogance. I thought about Eleanor's words often in those days. She'd been right. True worth wasn't in bloodlines, but in backbone. The Davenports had confused inheritance with achievement, nepotism with competence, and tradition with vision. They'd built their identity around excluding others rather than including excellence. As I worked late into the evening, reviewing contracts that would expand our operations into 3 new states, I realized that my grandmother had given me more than money. She'd given me the understanding that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. Building something so successful, so undeniably excellent, that your critics are forced to acknowledge your worth. The company Eleanor's granddaughter had built would outlast any legacy based merely on blood relations. It was built on merit, innovation, and the simple recognition that talent and determination matter more than the circumstances of one's birth. I never did respond to Tiffany's messages. Some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay that way. The Davenport family had made their choice about who deserved respect and opportunity. Now they were living with the consequences of that choice, while I was living with the rewards of mine. The irony was perfect. They'd spent my entire life making sure I knew I wasn't really family. In the end, they were right. I was something much better. I was free.